I want to read to you an original report. This is an investigation I did into Beto O'Rourke and Andrew Gillum's sugar daddies and mommies and the money they are taking. Because I know that, the resistance gets mad at me and Jimmy Dore and others who dare to point out if the resistance heroes are being corrupt or moving away from their promises. But my job as a journalist and status quo is not to prop up the Democratic Party. It's not to prop up candidates that candidates, 2 weeks before an election to make sure they win. I'm not going to ignore corruption. I'm not going to ignore candidates, even if they are running against awful candidates on the other side. I'm not going to ignore the associations they're making. Now, in this story, I also point out who Ted Cruz and Ron DeSantis are taking money from. I point out that in my view, I'm speaking for me, Beto is very much better than Ted Cruz. Same goes for Andrew Gillum. But that doesn't mean that I am going to ignore, and status quo is going to ignore, Democratic corruption. All right, so I'm going to read to you this story, and if you like the reporting, feel free to contribute to the GoFundMe as I read. And this is, by the way, this is just a report I did for my apartment. Getting out in the field, you find out more. You find out a lot more. And I want you to ask yourself, as I read this to you, I want you to ask yourself, if you read it back, and after you share the article, of course, like anything, share these articles so we can get more people to this website. Why is no one else covering this? Why is this information not out there? So here we go. The much talked about blue wave has the anti-Trump resistance ready to pop champagne at the White House gates. But if candidates should be judged by the company they keep and the cash they take, we might be ushering in the same old Republican-light Democratic Party of yesteryear on November 6th. In a status quo investigation of political fundraisers held ahead of the midterms, red flags were found linked to some of the leading darlings of the resistance. On September 12th, Texas Senate candidate Congressman Beto O'Rourke held a reception in New York City with a who's who of lobbyists and Democratic power brokers. There were 18 listed hosts for the parties, held at the swanky music venue, The Cutting Room, at $10,000 a pop for event chairs, $5,000 for co-chairs, and $2,500 for hosts. One attendee was Tonio Burgos, a fossil fuel lobbyist who has served as one of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's biggest donors, giving at least $85,000 to Cuomo personally and another $201,800 through his lobbying firm, Tonio Burgos and Associates. In addition to lobbying on behalf of hydraulic fracking pipelines, Burgos has also lobbied on behalf of United Water, Inc., now Suez North America, a privatized water company that has wreaked havoc on Atlanta and Pennsylvania, to name a few. From price hikes for consumers to sewage overflows in Milwaukee to contaminated drinking water in Gloucester, Massachusetts, serious problems have afflicted the municipalities across the country after they turned their water or sewage systems over to Suez-owned United Water, according to Food and Water Watch. O'Rourke, dining for dollars with fossil fuel fat cats like Burgos, is certainly at odds with his clean energy branding. His website touts, quote, comprehensive energy reform with a focus on renewable energy. It also pushes for stronger EPA regulation on fracking and new pipeline construction, which status quo is undoubtedly sure O'Rourke pushed to his fracking and privatized water lobbyist donor between dinner and dessert. If you could tell a little sarcasm there in that sentence. Not to be left alone at the table of big bankers not to be left alone at the table, big bankers joined big oil. Adrian Stewart, an executive director and assistant general counsel at J.P. Morgan. Stewart had himself quite a busy few years representing his criminal bank in multiple lawsuits over their pawning off of toxic subprime mortgages. Those dog shit eventually defaulted on mortgage loans onto unwitting investors and U.S. taxpayers via Fannie and Freddie Mae. J.P. Morgan settled with the Justice Department for $13 billion. Pennies on the dollar for J.P. Morgan compared to the $70,000 Every American lost. And of course, I link to all my sources and research so you could see where I'm getting this information from. Now, a banker paying $10,000 for fancy bread and brushing elbows with Beto isn't necessarily sinister. But Mr. Stewart isn't just any banker. He's an executive director at the biggest bank in America. In fact, he sent heartfelt props recently to his president, J.P. Morgan Chairman Jamie Dimon, the very person who presided over the grand larceny the investment bank perpetrated on the American people, along with misleading government regulators on the bank's exposure to toxic subprime mortgages. As Rolling Stone's Matt Taibbi put it so well, Dimon is a, quote, blow-dry, tirelessly self-regarding CEO who, after causing $20 billion in sanctions for the bank and helping to shatter the lives of millions of Americans, got a 74% raise. 74% raise. This was the equivalent of bank robbers having a parade thrown for them after getting caught. Status Coup assumes Stewart didn't toss Beto $10,000 out of kindness. And like the fracking lobbyists in attendance not aligning with O'Rourke's campaign promises, dining with complicit big bankers, executives, doesn't particularly jive with O'Rourke's championing stronger banking regulations and oversight. Neither does the $824,000 he's taken from Wall Street in his 7 years in Congress. So, before I read on, I'm about to get to Ted Cruz, who is plenty corrupt himself. So, you know, I keep hearing from Hillbots. I keep hearing from centrist Democrats. I keep hearing from progressives. Jordan, wait till after the election. Don't bring this stuff up right now. You know, we like that you expose both parties, but we got to get Ted Cruz out of office. That's not how we're going to operate. That's not how I operate, and that's certainly not how Status Quo is going to operate. Journalism doesn't take like a day off before the election. And part of the reason we have systemic income inequality, and I have charts to show you. I have prepared for this live stream, so I got plenty of charts to show you too. Part of the reason we have this systemic income inequality, the hoarding of money to the 1%. Thank you, Yadira, $2 in the super chat. She says, we call out Dems, we expect them to do better. Exactly. Is because we have this notion that if we just put in the Democratic Party, the sky will be lifted, we'll finally have people to fight those evil Republicans, climate change will improve, we'll start putting more money into middle class and working people's pockets. I could go on. And then it just doesn't happen. Why doesn't it happen? Could it be of the people that people like Beto O'Rourke are taking money from? And again, I'm not attacking Beto O'Rourke. I think he's better than Ted Cruz, which I get to in this story. But the bottom line is, lesser of two evils, you're going to keep getting crumbs, which is neoliberalism, if you keep hoisting up people like Beto O'Rourke as champions of progressivism. He's not. And I'm about to show you more. Thank you, Dan Campbell, for the $20 in the Super Chat. Thank you to Super Chat people. Thank you to GoFundMe contributors. I read on. Now, let's not get things too twisted. A paper bag would make a better senator than Ted Cruz, a slimy, corrupt, faux constitutionalist who is bought off by just about every special interest known to man. Although Status Quo does not tell its audience how to vote or who to vote for, you should know Cruz has way more corrupt folks stuffing his fat face with cash. I added fat for effect. From evil hedge funder Robert Mercer, the main donor behind $31 million in super PAC donations during 2016 campaign, to the blood on its hand NRA, $77,450 to Ted Cruz, to the fracking billionaires who double as anti-choice religious fanatics who fund the religious right. He's gotten $15 million from them. And again, the links are all in there for you to get my research. Mercer, in particular, is of Koch-like stature, a greedy, extreme conservative who's funded such white nationalist hubs, i.e. racist, misogynist, and Islamophobic outlets as Breitbart.com, who he sold his ownership shares to his daughter, the batshit crazy Media Research Center, and the Government Accountability Network founded by Steve Bannon. Mercer also founded and funded Cambridge Analytica. Yes, the same Cambridge Analytica that essentially served as the Trump campaign's data and digital analytics team by unethically leveraging private information of more than 50 million Facebook users without their knowledge or permission. Mercer is also accused of being a dime a dozen racist oligarch. In a lawsuit filed by a former research scientist at Mercer's hedge fund, Renaissance Technologies, Mercer was accused of saying the U.S. began moving in the wrong direction after the passage of civil rights in the 1960s, and that black people were doing just fine in the late 1950s and early 1960s period before the passage of the Civil Rights Act. Mercer allegedly added that the law, quote, infantilized black people, making them dependent on government. Oh, and of course, Mercer allegedly concluded that post-civil rights, the only racist people left in America were black. So clearly, Robert Mercer, who Ted Cruz is basically, it's how, Mercer says jump, Ted Cruz says how high, is a dime a dozen racist. So I say in this article, the old lesser of two evils at its peak. Vote for a political rock star like Beto, draped with those hopeful progressive platitudes, while cozying up with the very corrupt special interests keeping America in tip-top oligarchic shape, or vote for the devil. No wonder the majority of Americans don't vote. So before I move on to getting into Ted Cruz Andrew Gillum versus Ron DeSantis, thank you, Jim Vento, $10 on the super chat. Keep up the good work. Power belongs to the people. Let's bring it back. Yes, thank you to those people. And by the way, this story, although it took me a while to research and write, it's information that's out there. You can find it. Any journalist could find it. The problem is you cannot find the corruption that you're paid not to look for. Most journalists in this country are paid not to actually do any investigation. Most journalists, especially in the New York and D.C., are paid not to take on the Democratic Party. And most journalists are paid not to point out the toxic effects of money in politics. Because if you have to focus and you actually expose the toxic effects of money on politics, well, people might ask, well, MSNBC, NBC, your parent company, Comcast, is lobbying the government for tax breaks and deregulation and net neutrality. Well, how can you be covering these things if the people who sign your checks are doing that themselves? Same thing goes for CNN. Time Warner lobbies for tax breaks, deregulation, and all sorts of goodies. Same thing for CNN that has Big Oil do advertisements. The American Petroleum Institution advertises on CNN. The New York Times, like I said at the beginning of this live stream, is literally co-hosting conferences, money and oil conferences, because their largest shareholder is Mexican billionaire, fossil fuel fucker, Carlos Slim. I hope I don't get killed because he's also with the drug cartels. I mean, I could go on. They're paid not to look into this. I'm paid by you. So I will look into this. Jen will look into this. Ty will look into this. The other reporters we eventually bring on will look into this. In the other main event contest on November 6th, Tallahassee Mayor and Democrat Andrew Gillum is vying to become the first African-American governor of Florida. In his way is a Trump mini-me, Ron DeSantis, who creepily exploited his children in a campaign ad, reading them Trump's Art of the Deal bedtime stories while also helping them to build the wall via Lego set. DeSantis should arguably be getting a call from Child Protective Services rather than potential donors, but here status quo digresses. Gillum, who achieved one of the biggest upsets in 2018 by winning the Florida Democratic primary on a bold, progressive platform, unsurprisingly moonwalked away from that progressive platform for the general election. As Status Quo previously reported, while debating DeSantis, Gillum refused to stand by his primary pledge to enact a Medicare for All system if elected governor. And by the looks of who he's fundraising with, it's beginning to make more sense why. Gillum held a fundraiser on October 23rd with former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, who infamously ran for president on the inspiring promise that Medicare for All would never, ever come to pass. I was there in that gymnasium when she said it, covering it. Besides Gillum's seriously questionable decision to fundraise with a figure his progressive base disdains, The hosts of the fundraiser also raises eyebrows. The luncheon was held in the home of Henry and Marcia Laufer, a Florida super couple that showered the Democratic Party with cash over the years. Mr. Laufer was the co-founder of Renaissance Technologies, which the aforementioned Robert Mercer ran before resigning amidst pressures from colleagues over his political contributions. Laufer's works as the chief scientist at Renaissance and vice president of research made him a billionaire 4 times over. So obviously he spent his money on bold progressive change, right? Ha! Since 2012, Mr. Laufer donated $6.5 million to Priorities USA, the super PAC that served as the combo cash platter for President Obama and Hillary Clinton. In the case of Clinton, Priorities USA broke all sorts of laws that bar coordination between super PACs and campaigns. But shocker, the Corporate Media and Federal Elections Commission yawned in response. Laufer also gave some crumbs, $500,000, to correct the record in 2016. The super PAC run by conservative-turned-Clinton worshiper David Brock. Among other things, Correct the Record paid $1 million to create a paid online troll army to spread disinformation about Bernie Sanders and his supporters. Quote, those misogynist, racist Bernie bros. That was Correct the Record, folks. Like the rest of our plutocratic friends in this report, Mr. Laufer isn't providing millions to centrist Democrats out of kindness. In return for him and other Renaissance heavyweights donating to Obama, Clinton, and Democratic Party super PACs, Renaissance lobbied for and received plush tax breaks from the Obama administration, totaling nearly $7 million. It didn't stop there. Then Secretary of Labor Tom Perez, who is now the stumbling Lead with Our Values DNC chair, granted Renaissance a lucrative waiver that allowed the company to move investment earnings into Roth IRAs, meaning no taxes on future earnings of the company's cash cow medallion fund, which averaged a nearly 72% annual return from 2004 to 2014. In English, if you don't understand what that means because it's a little complicated, Tom Perez gave them a waiver that basically allowed them not to pay taxes on investment earnings. Big money, free money. Democracy in action, or more simply, money well spent, Henry. Gillum is also taking pounds of cash from George Soros and environmental billionaire Tom Steyer, who through his self-aggrandizing impeach Trump commercials has arguably worked harder to raise his profile for a possible 2020 presidential run than trying to get actual progressives elected. Like in the O'Rourke Cruz contest, Gillum's opponent Ron DeSantis is 100 times worse for Floridians. To be clear, he is worse. As this humble author said in a status Coup report, I personally would vote, despite the troubling abandonment of his progressive promises and cozying up with Democratic oligarchs big on supporting Republican-like Democrats, I would vote for Gillum in Florida if I lived there. But again, that's what I would do. We're not telling you what to do. You do what you feel is right if you live in Florida. DeSantis is a Trump mini-me, tossing out a mix of Islamophobia and pretend concern for working people. He's also hoarding money from all the usual greedy GOP plutocrat bosses, including Marvel chairman Isaac Perlmutter, who has handed DeSantis his private plane to jet around Florida and campaign. Perlmutter is part of a plutocrat trio frequently spotted at President Trump's White House of the South, Mar-a-Lago. Horrifyingly, instead of taking in the sun and girly cocktails, which were my personal favorite when I went to college, in Florida, Perlmutter and fellow plutocrat Bruce Moskowitz and Mark Sherman were essentially running Trump's Veteran Affairs Department from the lavish Florida beach resort. According to a ProPublica investigation, the trio, quote, spoke with VA officials daily, the documents show, reviewing all manner of policy and personnel decisions. They prodded the VA to start new programs, and officials traveled to Mar-a-Lago at taxpayer expense to hear their views. Quote, everyone has to go down and kiss the ring, a former administration official said. ProPublica reported that Perlmutter is the first person Trump goes to on veterans issues, by phone and over dinner when he returns to Mar-a-Lago. Perlmutter, who fought in the Six-Day War in 1967 for his home country of Israel, has unsurprisingly helped Trump in efforts to privatize the Veterans Administration. DeSantis also got $750,000 from Richard Uihlein, a hardcore anti-abortion, crushed the union's conservative whose family foundation gave $2 million to the Illinois Policy Institution, which was exposed for having dubious accounting practices that very well may violate the tax code rules for nonprofits. Translated, just another day in the oligarchy, folks. And I put this in there because I was feeling kind of dizzy as I was writing this with all this corruption. Are you as dizzy reading this combo platter of neoliberal and right-wing corruption as we are reporting it? Support our Status Coup GoFundMe so we have the resources to get in the field and expose more corruption. Gillum will undoubtedly be better for working people and the environment than the dangerous DeSantis, but clearly by his associations, political donors, and clear moonwalking away from progressive policies, Florida voters who vote Gillum will have to hold his feet to the fire if he's elected. The moment he starts rebranding himself as a donor-approved centrist who will work around the edges to provide itty-bitty incremental change. And that moment might come relatively quickly. So, like Texans, Floridians are left with the riveting choice of a progressive turned centrist overnight or Trump's evil stepson. No wonder why the majority of Americans don't vote. And in a more serious note, I don't want to minimize as a white dude, Andrew Gillum would be the first African-American governor of Florida, so that's no small deal. So I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I'm just telling you who Andrew Gillum is taking money from, who he's fundraising with, so you know, especially if you're in Florida, who you're voting for and what you should expect. Finishing up. Ultimately, the 2018 midterms, like the 2008 presidential, 2010 midterms, 2012 presidential, 2014 midterms, and 2016 presidential election, has been widely dubbed as, quote, the most important election of our lifetime. Make no mistake about it, President Trump has proven himself to be a dangerous reality TV star turned extremist demagogue. Although the rigged oligarchy we at Status Coup dub the United Corporations of America began long before the Donald, his presidency has taken a machete to working people while threatening black people, Latinos, Muslims, and immigrants. Trump has been empowered by an equally deranged, bought-off Republican Party led by Mrs. Ayn Rand, Paul Ryan, Paul Ryan, and the original Thanksgiving turkey neck, Mitch McConnell. It would be good for all Americans if these extremists were not in power. But make no mistake about it, reinserting neoliberals in progressive cloth to take the reins in Congress or governors' mansions around the country isn't going to lift the thousands of people your humble author has interviewed over the years. The bipartisan systemic corruption in this country has led to soaring income inequality, environmental genocide, land theft through eminent domain, minimum wage stagnation, poverty, hunger, crumbling infrastructure, gentrification that disenfranchises working people, and economic and social brutality towards minorities. But as friend of Status Coup Jimmy Dore has repeatedly pointed out, Bill Clinton signed right-wing bills into laws that Republicans and Ronald Reagan could have only dreamed of achieving. From banking deregulation to a regressive welfare, quote, reform to a racist crime bill and a, quote, free trade deal that decimated industrial workers throughout the country. And with the Great Depression on the horizon and a massive, progressive election mandate. Of course, they're drilling next to me while I'm live. A massive progressive election mandate, President Obama enacted an insurer-friendly health care law hatched out of a right-wing think tank. Quote, a stimulus package that was predominantly tax cuts rather than badly needed government job programs, a Band-Aid over a gunshot wound in Dodd-Frank, a blanket get-out-of-jail-free card for criminal bankers, an extension of George W. Bush's tax cuts for the rich, the creation of a secretive and murderous drone program, and an extension of the now indefinite war in Afghanistan, and many other neoliberal neocon goodies. Are Gillum and O'Rourke better for Florida and Texas than their toxic opponents? Absolutely. But are either change agents offering radical change? Follow the money, and you'll find your answer. So that is our first featured story up on the website right now. I hope you'll share it. I hope you'll read it so you definitely understand what has been going on. I think it's important, there's something called nuance. So bottom line, folks, and I hope you'll read that story again. I hope you'll share it. The bottom line is very simple. Beto O'Rourke is campaigning as a progressive. Andrew Gillum has campaigned as a progressive. Well, usually if you're progressive, you're not taking money and hanging out with fossil fuel lobbyists. You're not hanging out with executives and general counsel for J.P. Morgan, who helped destroy this economy and destroy your wallets. Usually, you're not hanging out with the people trying to privatize the hell out of this country. It is not enough just to say, oh my God, Ron DeSantis is scary and he's a Trump mini-me. It's not enough to say, oh, Ted Cruz is evil and awful. Because you know what? Yes, in a reactionary kind of way, and yes, in the grand scheme of things, it would be much better to get somebody else than Ted Cruz in there, somebody like Beto O'Rourke. It would be much better to get Andrew Gillum over Ron DeSantis. But the people that I meet around the country, the people that Jen has met around the country, the people that Ty has met around the country, we need more. We need more than changes around the edges. You need real progressive change, and you don't get that if you as a candidate, and eventually you as a governor or a congressman, you don't get that if you are taking money and then taking orders from the very people, the very special interests that are keeping this country down.